The week before Thanksgiving had been brutal, not because of work. Running Meridian Solutions, the largest consulting firm on the West Coast, was second nature after 12 years of building it from scratch. What weighed on me was the thought of another holiday dinner spent listening to my family dissect my so-called failure to launch, while I carved turkey and pretended to care. Jessica, my assistant, had begged me to skip. "Miss Thompson, you're about to close the Morrison Industries deal, a $300 million restructuring contract. You don't need to put yourself through this." But family was family, even when they still believed you were nothing more than a glorified secretary. The misconception started years ago, when I'd deliberately taken an executive assistant job at Henderson Associates. It wasn't ambitionless, it was strategy. I wanted to study how top firms pitched clients, structured deals, and ran operations. MBA programs offered theory. I wanted the mechanics. Nights and weekends, I built Meridian from nothing. When relatives asked about work back then, I'd say I was in consulting, helping companies restructure. Somehow, that became, Sarah is a secretary. And once the label stuck, it was cemented. The first time I mentioned starting my own firm, Uncle Mike chuckled. "That's cute, honey. Good to have goals." When I proudly shared my first client win, a $50,000 operations contract, Dad smiled and said, "See, all that phone answering is paying off. Maybe one day you'll be an office manager." After that, I stopped correcting them. Easier to let them believe the story than deal with their skepticism. Secretly, I found it amusing, listening to their career lectures while quietly building the empire that would one day hire the very Ivy League grads they worshipped. But this Thanksgiving felt different. Meridian had just been named Consulting Firm of the Year by Business Week. We'd grown to 2,400 employees in 15 offices. And frankly, I was tired of being the family charity case at 30. My parents' house in Bellevue hadn't changed. The Colonial's walls were lined with old photos, me in my high school cap and gown next to David's Harvard MBA and Jennifer's white coat. I arrived at 3 sharp with the obligatory green bean casserole. Mom met me at the door, wearing her usual mix of love and pity. "Sarah, you look so tired. Are they overworking you? I worry about how little they must be paying you." "I'm fine, Mom. The casserole's warm." "Perfect. Everyone's already here. David just flew in from New York, and Jennifer drove up from Portland. They've been telling us about their latest promotions." Of course they had. David was now a VP at Goldman Sachs. Jennifer had just been named head of cardiology. And me? In their eyes, I was still the family's underachieving secretary. The living room was a showcase of success stories. Dad in his recliner, Uncle Mike and Aunt Linda on the couch with their twin sons, fresh out of college, already earning more than Sarah ever will. David and Jennifer by the fireplace, drinks in hand, polished as always. "There she is," Dad announced as I walked in. "Our little secretary. How's life at the office, sweetheart?" "Busy," I said flatly, taking the wine Mom handed me. "I keep telling her to go back to school," Mom said to the room. "Maybe get a business degree. Move up a little." David nodded. "It's never too late to pivot. I know people at top MBA programs. If you start now, maybe the year after next you could get in." "That's thoughtful," I said, not mentioning that I'd lectured at 3 MBA programs this semester, teaching case studies I personally designed. Jennifer, never one to miss a jab, chimed in. "The problem is you've gotten comfortable. 30 years old, same job for 8 years, no ambition to advance. At some point, you have to own that lack of progress." Uncle Mike leaned forward. "What company is it again? Henderson something?" "I left Henderson 6 years ago," I said evenly. "I'm with a different firm now." "Oh," Mom blinked. "You never told us. What's it called?" "Meridian Solutions." Dad frowned. "Never heard of it. Bigger than Henderson?" "Somewhat," I replied, resisting the urge to point out that Meridian's revenue dwarfed Henderson's 50-fold. "Well, as long as you're happy," Aunt Linda said sweetly, in the tone people reserve for hobbies like scrapbooking or bird watching. Dinner carried on, updates, promotions, accolades, all the while. Their favorite narrative about my supposed stagnation looping unchallenged. David launched into his usual Goldman Sachs stories, billion-dollar portfolios, global clients, bonuses that could buy houses. Jennifer followed with tales of surgical breakthroughs and the medical journal preparing to publish her latest research. Then, inevitably, the spotlight turned to me. "So, Sarah," David asked casually, cutting into his turkey, "still doing the same kind of work? Filing, scheduling, that sort of thing?" "I handle client relationships and project management," I replied evenly. Jennifer smiled like a teacher praising a slow student. "That's wonderful. So you've moved beyond just answering phones. Real progress." Dad swallowed a forkful of mashed potatoes. "The important thing is that you're contributing something. Honest work has dignity, even if it's not glamorous." "Exactly," Uncle Mike agreed. "Not everyone can be a doctor or an investment banker. The world needs secretaries too. Essential workers," Aunt Linda added, giving me the kind of approving nod reserved for people who volunteer at soup kitchens. I focused on slicing my turkey with surgical precision while my family discussed me like I was a mildly disappointing sociology paper. "The thing that worries me," Mom said, her voice dipped in maternal concern, "is what happens when you're older. Administrative work doesn't have much of a growth path, and you're 30 now. You need to think about retirement savings, benefits, maybe buying a house someday." Dad jumped in, warming to his theme. "I've seen plenty of people get stuck in entry-level jobs. They think they're fine until they wake up at 50 with no savings, no career, no security." David nodded gravely. "He's right. The admin market's brutal for older workers. You should pivot while you can." "Pivot into what?" I asked. Jennifer tilted her head, thoughtful. "You could go back to school, business administration, maybe human resources, build on the skills you already have. The post office has good benefits," Uncle Mike offered. "Job security." "The post office," I repeated, savoring the words. Dad bristled. "Don't sneer. Postal workers do just fine. Better than drifting along paycheck to paycheck." I sipped my wine, picturing myself explaining to my board of directors that my family thought I should become a mail carrier. Dad pressed on. "The point is, you can't coast forever. You're 30, Sarah. Most of your classmates are married, own homes, raising kids, building real careers. What do you have to show for the last decade?" The question hung in the air. Even the cousins had stopped scrolling their phones. "You know what your problem is?" Dad's voice sharpened. "You've got no drive, no ambition. You're content to exist, to take the easy path, collect your little paycheck, go home and watch Netflix." "Dad," David murmured, "ease up. No, she needs to hear this. She'll never amount to anything if she doesn't change. 30 years old, still a secretary, still paycheck to paycheck, still no advancement." Silence pressed on the room. I set down my fork, looked around at their earnest, pitying faces, and took a slow sip of wine. "You're right, Dad. I should be more ambitious." The agreement threw him off. He'd expected excuses, not compliance. "Well," he muttered, "good. At least you recognize it." "I do," I said smoothly. "In fact, I've been thinking about making some changes." Mom brightened. "What kind of changes?" "Oh, just a few adjustments at work. Nothing dramatic." The conversation moved on, everyone satisfied that they'd staged their little intervention. I played along, cleared dishes, took leftovers, drove home to my penthouse, where I spent the evening finalizing the $2.8 billion acquisition that would put my firm, Meridian Solutions, in control of Morrison Industries, my father's company. Monday morning, when the Wall Street Journal headline broke, my phone rang at 10:47. "Sarah," Dad's voice was tight, bewildered. "I just got an email about a restructuring. They're saying Morrison's been acquired by a company called Meridian Solutions. That's where you work, isn't it?" "Yes." I looked out from my 42nd floor office across Elliott Bay. "That's my company." He hesitated. "But that's not possible. You're a secretary." "Actually, Dad, I'm the founder, CEO." The silence on the line stretched long enough to feel like an echo. "That's impossible," he finally whispered. "I started Meridian 12 years ago, while I was still at Henderson Associates. Remember? I kept telling you I was building a consulting firm. You just thought I meant I was hoping to get promoted to office manager someday." More silence. "Sarah," he said faintly, "this isn't a joke. Morrison is a $3 billion company. 2.8 billion. I corrected softly. That's what we paid for it. I could hear him breathing on the other end, ragged and uneven, trying to make sense of something that didn't fit his reality. This is impossible, Dad said again. You're a secretary. You answer phones. I was a secretary, I corrected gently, 8 years ago, back when I was learning the consulting business from the inside. I haven't answered phones since 2018. But you never said. I tried to tell you, Dad, for years. Every time I mentioned starting my own firm, you thought it was a pipe dream. Every time I talked about clients, you assumed I meant filing folders for my boss. Whenever I explained what Meridian did, you smiled politely and changed the subject. I could hear the shuffle of papers, the rustle of disbelief. He was reading the press release, staring at the headline that named me founder and CEO of the company that had just acquired his employer. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, he read aloud, voice hollow, founder and chief executive officer of Meridian Solutions, age 30, named Businessweek's Consulting Executive of the Year. That's me. You're 30, he whispered. Yes. And you own the company that bought Morrison Industries? I own 68% of Meridian, which now owns 100% of Morrison. The pause on the line was so long I thought he might have dropped the call. Then, brokenly, how much? His voice cracked. How much is your company worth? I glanced at the valuation report on my desk. After this morning's acquisition, about $12. $3 billion. The silence was heavier this time. Then I heard the sound of him sitting down hard. 12 billion, he breathed. You're worth 12 billion? Closer to 8. Personally, I clarified. Most of it tied up in company equity, not cash. In the background, I heard Mom's confused voice, what's wrong? Then Dad's muffled reply, our daughter just bought my company. Mom came on the line, sharp and trembling. Sarah, this isn't funny. Your father thinks he's having chest pains. It's not a joke. Mom, Google me if you don't believe it. Typing. A gasp. Oh my God. Richard, she's on the Forbes cover. Richard, she's on the cover of Forbes. Dad's voice returned. Horse, when was that? 6 months ago. They did a feature on women who built billion-dollar companies before 35. Why didn't you tell us? I leaned back in my chair, looking at the Seattle skyline through my office windows. I did. For 12 years, I tried, every holiday, every family gathering, but you'd already decided who I was, the secretary daughter who'd never amount to anything. Nothing I said could change that. Mom's voice wavered. We would have been proud. Would you? Last week you told me to go back to school, maybe apply for government work. David suggested the post office. Silence. Then Dad again, voice breaking. Sarah, we didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked. Not once did anyone ask me what I actually did. You assumed, and that was easier than listening. I heard him crying. Mom, shaky, asked, what does this mean for Morrison? For your father? His job is safe. Everyone's job is safe. We're restructuring systems, not people. But yes, technically, Dad now works for me. The weight of it landed. The family's disappointment, now their boss. Finally Dad spoke again, voice raw. I owe you an apology, a lifetime of them. Yes, you do. Can you forgive us? Can you forgive me? I thought about it, watching a container ship glide across Elliott Bay. 12 years of dismissal, 12 years of silence, and now this. I forgive you, but things will be different. No more career advice, no more assumptions. If you want to know me, ask me. Otherwise, let me be your daughter. Not your project. His laugh was wet, shaky. Deal. Good, because this weekend's family dinner, David and Jennifer are going to be very surprised. Mom's voice softened. We love you, Sarah. We just didn't understand. I know, but next time someone claims to know what's best for my life, remember this call. When I hung up, I sat for a long moment in my office, the city sprawling beneath me. Jessica, my assistant, peeked in with my schedule. Everything okay, Miss Thompson? Just family business, I said, straightening my jacket. Now, let's get back to changing the consulting industry. Seattle glittered outside. Somewhere across town, My father was still trying to reconcile his version of me with the truth, and for the first time in 12 years, Thanksgiving would look very different. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't words. It's success.